I thought I was going off the rails for a month. Here's a list of a bunch of arguments critics slash reviewers or people who talk about media and shit occasionally use that kind of piss me off. Also, it's very likely I've used them in the past, so before you accuse me of being a hypocrite, consider the fact that I probably just changed my mind. Anyway, let's roll. Oh gee, I pray for the day people will stop looking down on reference humor. Now the reason why I'm stuffing the implementation of both trend slash modernization and references into the same category is because I feel like they're frowned upon by many critics for more or less the same reason. I'm gonna start with references because I feel like it gets the most attack, constantly accused of being lowbrow and lazy. Now, I don't really get why some people call it lazy. I think references can be some of the most cleverly constructed jokes imaginable. Now, if we're talking about paying homage to something, then I guess I get it a little bit more. Not to say I agree with the sentiment, but I can see where they're coming from. But simple referential jokes, I feel like it gets a lot of bad rap. If I had to guess, it's probably because they have a history of witnessing poorly made jokes of that kind, but that's not something exclusive to referential humor. Any joke can be bad if the writer doesn't put enough effort to it, but if he knows what the fuck he's doing, the result's gonna be great! My favorite series of videos on YouTube are the horseshoe reviews, and look, I don't give a flying shit about My Little Pony, and even back when the popularity of the series and fandom was at its prime, I barely even paid any attention to the phenomenon. Nevertheless, I still enjoy the horseshoe reviews because they're excellent, because Endless just put a lot of thought and care into his work with a burning passion, and according to various sources, those reviews are heavily referential to the context of the Brony analysis community back when those videos were released. And I can say this to you, I don't know every single detail of that period. I kind of have a vague idea of what it was like based on my experience with the cartoon reviewing community, but I don't know anything about it, and I'm certain that if I was hyper aware of the paradigm, I would be able to appreciate those videos much more than I do now. And from what I've heard from people who are in fact familiar with the context, they say those are some of the smartest videos on YouTube. And even I, coming from a place of ignorance, I already find those videos to be hella entertaining and thought-provoking, better than a lot of videos I've seen on YouTube. Here's another example. I've never seen Evil Dead in my entire life, and yet Hostel Gato is one of my favorite and funniest Billy and Mandy characters. You know, there's this thing called surface level and recontextualization. An artist might have a source of inspiration, but an audience member can still find value in it even if he doesn't share the exact same perspective with the artist. And good reference jokes usually succeed in standing on their own even without you knowing what it's referencing. Now let's get a little more specific and talk about trends, and this is something that I feel like is more prevalent in the realm of animation, this idea that cartoons should be timeless and stand the test of time. Now let me set the record straight, nothing can really be timeless. At best, I would say that a show can be vague in regards to the period it's taking place, but even then, it's not completely timeless. I'm just spitballing here. Let's say Foster's is a show regarded as timeless. Well, were there any cars 500 years ago? Was there a TV 400 years ago? Was the internet a thing 100 years ago? Did people used to dress like this 80 years ago? The point is, Foster's clearly has an identifiable time period, it's just not specific enough to a certain year. And again, it's the same story with the referential humor. These people probably have a long history of watching stuff that inserted modernization poorly, so now they think that modernization in general is shit, when in reality it's entirely reliant on the people working on the project knowing what the fuck they're doing. I for one can appreciate stuff that strongly reflects the time period of when it was released. I can see it as more of a time capsule like Lucky Star. And look, I am aware that the inclusion of references and trends can go horribly wrong, especially when it comes to memes and lingo. I'm just not willing to completely dismiss that idea like a ton of people do. Oh god, I really cannot stand this bullshit. This is kinda related to my recent development of cynicism towards cynics. And I think I started to get really angry over this after seeing a lot of people shitting on MCU for making their movies accessible to a broader audience with their PG-13 rating, aka the Marvel movies are for babies comments that I constantly hear. Look, you can have whatever negative opinion on those movies all you want, but if one of your arguments for why those movies suck is because they make them for kids, that's pretty much the quickest way for me to stop taking you seriously. First of all, the idea that they're made for kids is already stupid. Do they have children in mind when they make those movies? Absolutely, I would have to be completely naive to believe otherwise. But if they really wanted to make those movies just for kids, they could have easily just given them a PG rating. Not to mention, most if not all their movies deal with pretty mature themes. You would realize that if you weren't too busy obsessing over the fact that they don't make those movies as adult-rated as what you would expect from an R-rated film. And look, these people who bring up this criticism aren't entirely wrong. Disney does try their best to not make those movies edgy enough to alienate parents who would take their children to the theaters, and probably advertisers. But of course they would do that. Superhero properties tend to resonate with children, like a lot. This is just a business simply recognizing their potential consumers and doing their best to capitalize on that market. But that's not a bad thing. It's okay for companies to implement marketing tactics in order to maximize their potential profits, just as long as those decisions don't damage the final product. And don't get me wrong, this can happen, and in fact it did happen with Edgar Wright, in which they didn't allow the director to fully embrace his vision with the first Ant-Man movie, and I don't approve of that. I think Disney deserves criticism for doing that. But if all they're doing is making their movies more accessible to kids, then what the fuck do you want them to do? Are you waiting for a movie where Black Widow gets graphically raped? Is that what it takes for a movie to hold your attention? And I mean, demanding R-rated superhero movies is completely fine, but it's not that big of a deal if most of them aren't. There are still other R-rated movies out there that you can watch, and it's still possible to write compelling stories with the PG-13 mark. And let me make something clear, I do think that giving a PG-13 rating can actually damage the final product. For instance, a common complaint I've been hearing from people who watch Venom was that they felt that giving it an R rating would have complemented the violent scenes given the slaughtering nature of the character, and I think that's a solid complaint. And if you have specific examples of Marvel pussing out due to its age rating that ended up hurting the experience, that's fine, I can respect that. Though at least make an argument for why. I watch cartoons for kids as a job, and I've seen many of them that manage to have pretty mature themes that could only resonate with me as an adult. I'm pretty sure movies that are allowed to say shit can do that as well. The Marvel thing is just one example. There are other instances like when a show or movie, especially if it's animated, has for example character designs or particular aspects of its premise that are marketable, or, and I see this a lot, reeks of merchandise material, and then I see a bunch of people pointing that out without explaining how it's somehow a bad thing. Not to say that there aren't instances where it's a problem, in fact I can think of a few myself, like needless addition of gadgets and power upgrades just to sell more toys, commonly in action series. It's not always a problem, but I've encountered moments where it was too gimmicky and overwhelming. This is just one example, and I'm sure that I can find others if I really cared. I'm not against the idea of criticizing marketing decisions, but if your only argument is that it's marketable and merchandise bait, then at least elaborate on your point more, because it just kind of feels like you're hating on it because you have some kind of pretentious elitist vendetta against merchandise and commercial success. No, I'm not gonna lie, I think here I'm just complaining about people having different opinions than mine. I struggle to relate with people who take tone consistency and narrative coherency seriously. I'm gonna start with the coherency thing because I think I know why I'm not as strict with scripts being tightly constructed, and that is because I spent most of my life watching television shows in which episodes are to some extent self-contained and not a linear narrative like movies tend to be. But even with movies, let's talk about Spider-Man 2. I think we can all agree that Peter's little arc with Aunt May was great and emotional and shit. Now let me ask you something, how relevant that is to the overall story? If we were to remove the entire subplot about the guilt of Uncle Ben's murder, would it really change the movie's outcome and thematical undertone all that much? You could argue that it was an important moment for both characters, but that doesn't mean it was important for Spider-Man 2's self-contained story, but we still love it and we wouldn't want those scenes to be removed. And this reminds me of another annoying type of narrative coherency boner. I've seen some people shit on sequels for relying too much on you being familiar with the previous movies, and I know I'm talking about Marvel a lot, but some people say this about the Avengers movies. Not everyone of course, but there's always a certain number of people whining about the overabundance of characters, and because they didn't watch every movie that came before it, despite the fact that the Avengers movies are essentially sequels. They feel confused or uninvested, and they act like it's the movie's fault. Look, if you're too busy or lazy to keep up with the previous movies, that's completely fine, but if you're gonna do that, don't act surprised if you feel uninvested, in spite of the fact that the characters received build-up in previous movies. I understand that it's hard to keep up with the monstrous library MCU has to offer, but that doesn't mean you're in the best position to judge the effectiveness of the emotional core if you haven't even watched the previous movies. Just saying, man. Okay, I'm done with Marvel. As for the whole tone consistency thing, I'm not gonna dwell on it too much because quite frankly, I think it's just more of a preferential difference. People shit on Alien Force for being darker than the original Ben 10, and I also hear the tone is all over the place types of complaints, and honestly a lot of the times I just don't agree with them. I guess I'm just more willing to accept different tones in the same movie or show, as long as whatever emotion they want to convey is communicated and delivered well. And also, I think most people agree with me on this. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I might upload future videos like this, and if you can come up with examples of arguments critics or commentators use that you don't agree with, maybe I don't agree with it too. So leave it in the comment section if you want. So yeah, get off my back and bye for now.